Salam lennantehun. Peace be with you. Today I'm going to start with a question. And the question is, have you ever stopped to think about how much of life comes down to the smallest acts of care? And I asked this question because my new friend recently told me something that I'll never forget. She said that our heartbeats are numbered. And that caught me off guard. We were talking about how easily startled she can feel. You know, the kind of jumpiness that stays in your body long after the original danger passes. When you feel caught off guard by life, even when life isn't trying to hurt you in that moment. And as we talked, we realized we had this experience in common, and we had it in common with my mom. But what moved me most wasn't just this honest sort of heart to heart about these experiences with a new friend. It was what she said next. She told me that her husband, knowing how deeply that jumpiness lives in her body, has gone out of his way to help her heal, and not with big gestures, not with a dramatic rescue, but with something so quiet and intentional. Her husband will make sure to enter her side vision before getting close. He moves in a way that helps her nervous system in her body, rather her body's messaging system, notice that he's there before she feels like jumping out of her skin. And this is an example of actively choosing something called co-regulation, because sometimes we need a little help calming down. And co regulation is calming down together. And I immediately thought to myself, what a beautiful expression of love. What an unsung hero. Sometimes we think love has to be loud to count. We think care has to be expensive or big or heroic, and it can be. But often the most meaningful forms of care are the smallest ones, the simplest ones, the ones that say, I see what life has done to your body, and I choose to move through this world in a way that doesn't do any more harm. And this conversation with my new friend brought me right back to something that kept coming up as we wrapped up the ER series, which is standing by someone vulnerable doesn't always take a lot. Sometimes the smallest acts, otherwise known as interventions in public health, can have the biggest impact. And this idea keeps coming up with all the responses that I get from this storytelling journey, which I really didn't mean to keep going, but I appreciate everybody cheering me on and asking me to keep going. So many people have reached out to talk about resilience in my family. They talk about mom's resilience, they talk about dad's resilience, they talk about the love between them. And some people were so touched by the story of dad saying that he'd take a bullet for mom, and to this day, he says he'd do it again. And of course, people have described that as romantic, and they talk about how brave and rare it is. And yes, it's all of those things, but we've also talked about how it's part of a bigger story about what it means to stand by another human through deep pain and big fear and bigger uncertainty and slow healing, which, by the way, is a lifetime journey. It's not something that you get to and you stop doing. When I think about resilience, I can't help thinking about my father's childhood. And I want you to imagine life when you were between the ages of 6 and 8 years old. For me, that was between first and third grade. Imagine in that time walking an hour and a half round trip to get to school. That was my dad. Now, imagine being between the ages of 9 and 11. For me, that was between fourth and sixth grade, and walking 3 hours round trip to get to school. That was also dad. Now, I don't know about you, but I would have been terrified, both literally and figuratively, walking through life this way until I finished the sixth grade. Now, imagine being around 12 years old, and for me, that was seventh grade, and you're walking 5.5 hours round trip to get to school. You see where I'm going? That was my dad. And by high school, for grades 9 and 10, imagine now walking 7 hours round trip just to get that education. Then imagine reaching a point where you simply don't have enough hours left in the day to study. So for grades 11 and 12, you leave your home and you stay with extended family in a city nearest to your school. Imagine you're making occasional weekend trips to visit your family, maybe every 2 weeks, just to have a fighting chance at learning well. That was dad's reality. And when I say I am proud of my parents, I mean that in the deepest possible sense. I mean proud in the way that only comes when you understand that someone was given very little to nothing and still built a life so full of possibility, not only for themselves, but for their children. And I'm forcing myself to just get through the feels for the sake of finishing this episode. That kind of story is not just about individual perseverance, it's also about systems, about what people are forced to face, about what people endure when access is not even, when there is not enough support, when life asks much more from some people than it ever should. And maybe that's part of why these stories mean so much to us in this community, because underneath all of our different lives, there is something we have in common, and it's the human condition. We all carry something no matter our background. All of us know something about struggle, even if the details differ. We all know something about trying to keep going. And that brings me back to the heart as an organ, as a symbol, as a place where fear and grief and courage and memory and love all seem to meet. When my new friend told me that our heartbeats are numbered, it stayed with me, not because I think there's a literal score for each of our lives. As a scientist, I want to be careful there. The research doesn't support this overly simple idea. There's no fixed number of heartbeats that we each get at birth, but there is something meaningful in the science. And in fact, a Science Alert article talks about a long-term study of men in the Copenhagen male study. Now, if you are hearing me, you're noticing that it's a study of men, so there's bias there, meaning it's a limited study just by that design, and you're just gonna have to bear with your data nerd over here. Who's going to have a little bit of a geek fest every now and again. But despite its limits, that's just one of its limits, by the way, that it's a study of just men in one area. And if you want to talk more about the other limits, please find me. I love doing this. But the data from this study support that higher resting heart rate might contribute to negative effects on health over time. In the original study, which I did look up, and I'd encourage anyone to practice trying to understand. As with anything in life, the more you practice something, the better you get at it. And we could all use a little bit more scientific literacy as we wait and hope for more sustainable systems change that doesn't rely so much on each of us getting a PhD in epidemiology to be able to navigate these systems. But the researchers found that higher resting heart rate was associated with higher risk of death, even after they took other factors into account, like exercise. Now, that doesn't mean every fast heartbeat is stealing from your future. It means that the body keeps track in ways that we need to respect. It also shows that what raises your heartbeat and why it raises your heartbeat and how long your heartbeat stays high, all of that matters both in the moment and over time. It means how your body works matters, and stress matters, and how much strain it's already under matters. That wear and tear on the body matters. And once we start thinking that way, we can't help but ask even harder questions about the environments we create for each other, such as what does it do to a person's heart to live in constant fear? What does it do to a caregiver's heart to constantly be on alert? What does it do to a patient's heart to feel consistently dismissed or frightened or rushed or thrown away by the systems that are supposed to help? When I think back to mom's ER experience, one of the things that keeps coming up is fear. She said she felt terrified, and I think about what terror does to the body. I think about how quickly the heart can beat in moments like that. I think about my own body that day, even from a distance, hearing over the phone what was happening and feeling like my heart would just pound right out of its chest. And then I consider what was missing. In all the years I helped mom through healthcare, I can't remember any of her doctors having had enough time to ask about the life she lived. I can't remember a time when her trauma history, such as the fact she survived famine during a war, was used to help doctors understand the person in front of them, not just the symptoms. And that absence suddenly feels glaring to me. And thankfully, we have tools. There are frameworks that exist. There are ways to ask questions that help us understand patients better. And of the many, many, I want to highlight the American Academy of Family Physicians Everyone Project. It includes tools to help practices screen for social needs, such as personal safety, just to name one example. It also includes an action planning resource and a neighborhood navigator to help connect patients with community resources. And it's not perfect, but even good resources, well, it's not perfect, but it's a place to start. And even good resources can be really tough to use. Supportive systems often come with eligibility criteria and administrative burdens and practical limits, and navigating those services in itself can feel just as exhausting as navigating healthcare. But it's a meaningful reminder that healthcare doesn't have to remain narrowly focused on disease alone, which brings me right back to that almost century-old idea that we talked about before, often credited to William Osler, which is that it's really important to get to know what sort of patient has a disease than just trying to identify the disease alone. The person's lived experiences matter, their access, their trauma, their supports, all of these matter. And if we want to care for our hearts, we can't only think about hearts in the anatomical sense, although yours truly is always happy to do that. We also have to think about what people are carrying, and this applies beyond medicine. We live in a time of information overload. Many of us are consuming way more information than we know what to do with. And I want to pause here and share a small practice I found helpful not too long ago. Adam Grant, who is a famous organizational psychologist, and that just means that he studies the things that help us do better in work. He offers some guidance on critical thinking that has stayed with me, and it's to be a little more skeptical of ideas you already agree with, to be a little more generous to ideas that challenge you, to look for weaknesses in what you love and strengths in what you dislike, to learn from sources that are willing to look at different views that don't always agree, except for me. You can trust everything that I say. No, do not trust everything that I say. Think about it critically. I think it's useful not just for sciences and healthcare, but in daily life. Ask who is speaking, who's their training, what are their motives, what are they trying to help us understand? Are they inviting thoughtfulness, or are they trying to sell some certainty? And these questions matter because how we think shapes how we care. And maybe that's what this episode is really about, how we care for our hearts, our very own, each other's hearts, and the hearts that move through systems that we have built. My friend's husband caring enough to get in her line of sight before speaking. My father walking impossible distances for an education because he envisioned a better future for yours truly. My mom surviving fear for the umpteenth time inside systems that never fully got to know what she lived through. Social workers doing heroic labor behind the scenes, helping people go through crisis after crisis, use resource after resource, often with little to no recognition. And these may look like separate stories, but to me, they're all connected. They're all about what happens when human beings are met with attunement instead of indifference. Indifference is either not noticing or not caring. Attunement is noticing and caring. One of my newer friends regularly tells me, "You're safe." And it just dawned on me how powerful that phrase is. These stories are all about what becomes possible when we remember that care is relational and structural and spiritual and practical and very deeply human. So here's what I leave you with today. At the individual level, we can take better care of our own hearts and each other's hearts through a little more attentiveness, a little more gentleness, and a little more wise discerning of what are we hearing? Who's speaking into our lives about what we need to do, and why are they speaking into our lives about what we need to do? At the relational level, we can ask, what does this person need to feel safer, to feel more seen, to feel more regulated, to feel more respected? You're safe. One phrase, super simple, little to no time, and yet significant, powerful effects. Getting into someone's line of sight might take a second or two, maybe three. Really simple, really powerful. At the systems level, we can build care models that don't treat lived experience as optional information. We can ask about trauma. We can screen for social needs. We can connect people to resources, and we can be with them, be alongside them as they try to use these resources. We can value the labor of social workers, of caregivers, and all of those who are doing invisible work, helping people get to sometimes the next day. Because protecting a heart doesn't just start and end in the operating room. Sometimes it starts in how you enter a room, in how you speak, in how you ask, in how you notice, and in how you respond. And in whether the person before you feels like a problem to process or a human being to honor. This is Alchemizing Stories. We turn pain into purpose. If any part of this episode or the series it now belongs in helped you, or you think it'll help someone else, pass it on or interact with it however you feel the most comfortable. Salama Tribza. Abundant peace to you.